All right, so here is the Google Earth view of my property, and you can see here the yellow line is the line to the tower. And I used the ruler here. It shows you I'm just over 1 mile away, so not super far away from the tower.
All right, so this is the video that a lot of you guys have been waiting on, and this is the Waveform DualPlus Duo. These are live periodic directional antennas, and so these are going to compare to their 4x4 panel antenna, which their current one is the Quad Pro antenna. And now these ones are more directional. They're harder to aim, but they're supposed to give better performance, but there are a lot of caveats with that. So I'm going to go put these side by side, test them on the stock T-Mobile gateway, as well as probably a Chester Cheetah gateway, just to see some differences. I can do some band locking and other stuff with the Chester Cheetah, so it's a little bit more adjustable. But we're going to compare to see, are these really better? And I'm going to go ahead and give you a hint. The answer is it depends, and we'll get into that in a little bit. All right, so for reference, this is the Quad Pro antenna. Both of these are 4x4 antennas, but this one is less directional. Still a very good antenna. I get great speeds with this up there currently in my attic, but this new DualPlus Duo is going to be hopefully more powerful. All right, so I have the G4AR white T-Mobile gateway. That one already has external antenna port, so you can literally screw this kit into with their included cables that they provide, and just screws right into it. But if you don't have that, you have one of these other gateways, even Verizon or AT&T, they include the pigtails in the kit that allows you to, like I've done with this gray Verizon one, is actually pop the cover off and you can screw in these pigtails, and then that gives you external antenna ports. I have videos for most of them out there. If not, Waveform can also help you with the instructions to do that. It does take a little bit of work. But the other thing I do want to point out, I'm not going into full details of the kit because I have a video for that. You can click it right here in the top of the screen. But what I will mention is they also include this window or door entry cable. It's a nice thin ribbon cable that has a silicone overmold on it, and this allows you to get out from inside the house much easier than going through a hole in the wall or a soffit or whatnot. So this is something you can use optionally if you need to as well. And then the cabling, they provide anything from 10 to 60 foot links in 10 or 20 foot sections there. So let's go get this installed up in the attic and then start the testing comparison. Alright, that's at least close enough to get started, and then we'll have to aim them once we plug them up. Alright, so I know the lighting is not the best up here in the attic, but you can see I have the DualPlus Duo set up, as well as the 4x4 panel. Now I have them hooked up to their own kits, and since this is an older panel and actually has this black cable, it's actually a little bit higher grade cable than the white one, but it's less flexible. But that's something they've changed to over time from Waveform's standpoint. So I have them hooked up. I've tuned them in so that I get the best signal and speed performance. And then I did all my testing on it. And you can see here that the cabling is in RAN. They both have 30 feet of cabling exactly. The white one, or the DualPlus Duo, I actually have going through the entry cable underneath that door, at least for this testing. The other black cable goes directly in. That's where I have kind of a permanent install for me on the inside with jacks on the other side. But that is the setup. I go in here into the loft space. All right, so looking at the inside, you can see it goes across the threshold there. There's a door sill, and then goes around. Don't mind the kids' play tent up here. And then over here is where I have my little mini setup for my router and my multiple ISPs, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and I switch them out up here. But as you can see, I have the cabling coming in here. I have a Chester Cheetah up there right now. It's plugged into that panel antenna, but I was changing them all around. And then just for reference here, I actually have an Eltsys unit. Probably can't see it up on the top of that tower. So that's my setup here at the house. Now the tower is actually out that way, so closer to where the antennas came from, not out this window here, just for reference. All right, so I did lots of testing for several hours last night. I did it late, about midnight to 2 a.m. Partly because that's when I like to do it, but also that also helps with the deprioritization, just in case there's any issues with that. I'm not during a peak time, so I should be able to get the best speed possible from the devices I have, and not just deprioritization. So I took all kind of notes on here of the different ones, and I tested the G4AR as well as this Chester Cheetah. This device is great because it allows me to band lock. I can switch between 5G SA and 5G NSA, and that's actually an important note I want to say here. And before I get too far, because I'm going to go into very deep details here of all the different speed tests and why they change, what kind of bands I'm on, all types of information there. But the long story short, for those that are just impatient, is for me at my location, the DualPlus Duo was actually about a tie with my 4x4 panel from Waveform. So I got good improvements over not having the antenna, but between those two different ones, I would say they're actually probably about a wash. But I really do want to go into the details. Before I get too far, before I lose you, I do want to say please hit that like button and then consider subscribing to my channel to get more content like it. That does help the channel grow a lot, so I appreciate your support there. So into the details, what I'm going to do is I'm going to my computer, I'm going to go through it. I'm also going to show you where my location is relative to my tower, as well as my terrain and everything before. It's not ideal, and that's actually probably some of the reasons why I'm not seeing as big of a difference with this DualPlus Duo over the panel. So I'll get into all that. Let's hop over the computer and let's go through it.
All right, so here is the Google Earth view of my property, and you can see here the yellow line is the line to the tower. And I using the ruler here, it shows you I'm just over 1 mile away, so not super far away from the tower. But if we zoom in especially and look, the terrain is pretty flat. It's Michigan after all, but I do have a lot of trees in between me, so I do not have direct line of sight to the tower. I cannot see the tower, even if I were standing on the roof. All I see is this big bunch of trees across from the pond. So my setup, my antennas are in this this top attic here. You can see this window here in the corner. That's actually where I was, in on that third floor loft. That's that little area there. All right, so if I zoom out a little bit, and let's see if I can fly across, you can see how many trees I have to get through until I get to the tower, which is right along right here. Now, obviously, it looks more like a dagger or a spear sticking out from the ground. That's just Google Earth for you. This is the tower. Now, of course, it's a couple hundred feet above the ground, so that does help it out a little bit. But basically, I have a 1 mile shot through a bunch of trees, but not any hills or other terrain. And then, of course, by being in the attic, I am now going through the sheathing and the tar paper and the shingles, which is also not ideal. The best thing to do is to put it outside. But for this testing, I did not do that. So note that your setup and how you're configured will greatly affect how each antenna performs. And typically, the locked periodic directional or the DualPlus Duo setup, that one does better for having direct line of sight. So I am not ideal from that standpoint, but I want to test it to see just how different it was. So let's dive into the results to really see what the difference between the different setups were. All right, so this is going to be an eye chart, but do bear with me if you really want to see the details here. This is the summary of it, and I'll go through all the details of what this means. These are averages across many tests. Now that test includes different bands, different configurations there, so I'll go through that in a second here. But if we look here in pink, you can see that's the stock G4 AR gateway just sitting there with internal antenna on, not using any external. I was getting about 321 down. That's megabits per second, and then upload is 10 megabits per second. But then my idle ping was about 23, and you can see my upload and download loaded pings as well. All those are important numbers. Now, funny enough, something big happened recently, and that is the G4AR that I have is now using 5G SA or 5G standalone. They have not turned that on in the past. I didn't even catch that other users or other outlets reported that, but I did have a few other users the past month or two reach out to me and say, hey, I don't get a 4G LTE signal metric on my app. I only see 5G. What that means is that it's using 5G standalone, which is something that's been great to use. And I have the third-party routers. I've been able to use it for years at my property, but they have not turned it on the stock T-Mobile gateways until now. So the cool thing is that mine's using 5G SA, and really the first time I realized that was this last night because I was looking into it. So it was using 5G SA on N25 to get this speed. When I hooked up the waveform panel antenna, which actually is typically hooked up to it, it actually slowed down for the download, but it speed up drastically for the upload. And I looked into it, and it switched to a different band. It went to N41, still 5G SA. But here's another caveat with the T-Mobile stuff is you can't tell what bands they're on other than their one primary band, because even the T-Mobile stuff has the ability to do carrier aggregation and connect to multiple bands, but you only see one band, the primary band, in the app. Even if you use the Hint Control app, which is a third-party app, you're only going to get that one main band, and so you don't know if it's combining another band or if you're on NSA, if it's combining multiple LTE bands. You don't see that information. Long story short, though, is the waveform panel at that time was actually slower than the internal. Now, this morning I tested it with the waveform hooked up, and I was getting over 400 for the download. So this is back-to-back testing, try to be fair, but it actually performed worse. But it was because of it switching the band that it was connected to, and with that stock T-Mobile gateway, I don't have a way to force it to the same band. So I said, whatever, I'm going to keep testing. So I switched it from the waveform panel to what I'm calling DPD, which is the DualPlus Duo antenna. And that one now got faster speeds for both download and upload than the internal, but it actually did not get as good upload as that panel did. Pings were worse as well on this setup from I did here. Now this is again averages. I'll go into more details here in a little bit. But so being frustrated that I couldn't control the bands and do a apples to apples comparison, I switched over to my Chester Cheetah with the X75. So that's SDX, Snapdragon X75 modem. It's one of the latest and greatest modems out there. It can do the most carrier aggregation. I can get the most bands. I was getting, I'll go into it in a second here, but N41, N25, and N71, all of those 5G signals all connected together and aggregated. So just the stock Chester Cheetah with its little paddle antennas on it, I was getting 458 down and 11 up. So, honestly, it was beating the G4AR even with a waveform antennas on the outside of it for download at least. Upload was not as good. And you can see the ping as well. It's another important part. The ping was better than the G4AR. So next I added the DualPlus Duo antenna to the Chester Cheetah, and you can see I average across multiple runs about 627 down, 36 up, and then with the waveform panel on the Chester Cheetah, 766 down and 33 up. So that's where I call it about a tie. I mean, the waveform panel is a little bit faster on download, but slower on upload, and then their pings are very similar. So in the end, for me, I call them about a even Steven. If we go over here and look at a couple different things, I can scroll down maybe here and show you some charts that I made up to try to help visualize it a little bit here. So here are some different speeds that I have. On the left, on the lower, we have the stock G4AR. The blue bars are the download speeds, and that correlates to that left axis there, which has megabits per second of download. And then the orange is the upload speed, and the number beside it is the upload megabits per second there for that one. So you can see here stock G4AR was clearly the slowest other than the waveform panel on it. And again, that's because it switched bands on me, but drastically faster upload speed. And maybe if I messed with that some more, I could do something. But the problem was my hands were really tied with that stock gateway because I couldn't get it off of N41. And for whatever reason, N41 was being bogged down at that time for download speeds. When I switched to the DualPlus Duo, I switched back to the N25 band, and then that got me, that's more of an apples to apples of G4AR, DPD to the stock one. That's basically the difference I got with the antenna. So I went, from whatever that is, 320 to 410 for download, and I went there from about 10 upload to 17 upload or something like that. So a nice improvement there. And again, my setup being on the same level in the house and having just the antenna, 20, 30 feet away to the side is not the biggest difference. If you had your gateway on the first floor and you had your antenna outside, you would see even a bigger difference here than I see. This number 7 here, this is the stock Chester Cheetah gateway, just with no external antenna. So that's a good reference point for you of how that performs by itself. And then here, by adding on the DualPlus Dual, you can see nice speed improvements, very consistent. And these are different bands. I'll scroll up here and show you that as well. And then the far right is the Chester Cheetah with the Waveform panel antenna. So I had some variation there in the upload based off what bands I was on, but the download was pretty consistent and very fast there with that Chester Cheetah. If we scroll down, the other important thing I really want to call out is the latency. So this is your ping, and this is another place I see a big difference. The higher the bar, the worse it is. And some of these pings are horrendous. If you look at the stock gateway, my upload is as bad as 1700 milliseconds, which is 1.7 seconds of a latency. I mean, that's like terrible, right? For video conferencing or something, it's horrendous. And that's one of the reasons I got looking into other improvements for my space. So for whatever reason, if it's because I'm going through the attic space or whatever, but my upload latencies are always terrible here at my property. So the only way to get them down finally was really with that Chester Cheetah, and going into certain bands. That's where you can see the orange and gray bars really dropping down a lot. The blue bars are referencing the idle are the unloaded ping, and that's on the different axis here on the right. So these numbers are much lower. They're talking about more like 20 milliseconds, which is reasonable from these. All right, so let me zoom into this upper chart. This is all of the data together. And now for some of the reportings, I did leave them out because I would force it into something weird. Or, for example, here on setup number 8, I actually switched the antenna order. So all the antenna orders that I did were basically for the DualPlus Duo was 1, 2, 3, 4, which is different than I use for the panel. The panel is 1, 3, 2, 4. For the DualPlus Duo, each antenna has label 1 and label 2, and so you have 2 label 1s and 2 label 2s basically. But so I just did 1, 2 hooked up to the cable 1, 2, and then I had the other antennas 1, 2 hooked up to 3, 4 on the cable, and then that cable I just did 1, 2, 3, 4 into the back of both the stock gateway as well as the Chester Cheetah. But I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything, so I just flipped those for this specific test to see what it would do, and it drastically hurt my signals and my speed. So that's why I did not include that in any of my averaging or the plots down below. I did something else kind of unique as well, and that was with the G4AR. Basically the stock internals, it was on N25, but when I put the waveform panel, it wanted to go on N41, and I can't switch it between the two. So it was stuck on those two things. And what's interesting about that is the drastic performance change I got between those two bands. And again, I don't know what other bands it was connected to. It could have been connected to N25 still as a secondary, and it was just switching back and forth on which one was the primary. I don't even know. But when I switched it from the panel to the DualPlus Duo, I had the gateway on. I just did a hot swap to the DualPlus Duo. It stayed on N41 for a little bit, long enough for me to do a test. And so I got my metrics there and I did my test, but you can see it performed poorly. And you can see this upload loaded ping was horrendous at over 7 seconds. Now I think that might be a little bit of a test anomaly because maybe the gateway was trying to switch, because it right after I did that testing, it did switch to N25. So that might be an anomaly there. I sure hope. But all that said is the gateway did not like being on N41 with the DualPlus Duo. It wanted to go to N25. So it did go to N25, and when I did that, my speeds were pretty good. That's where I got an improvement there, and you can see there that's where I got the average numbers for. But now if we look at the Chester Cheetah, this is what's so cool about it, is that I can see all the different bands that I'm connected to. And I did both 5G SA and 5G NSA just for testing sake. Now I didn't get all of the signal metrics because I forgot to do that on a couple of these, but basically whenever, and you can only get the primary signal metrics anyways, as far as I know. So these are N41 signal metrics. So what's interesting here is on N41, which the G4AR did not like, if I compare the signal metrics here, I can see I got the same RSRQ, but I got 6 dB better signal with the Chester Cheetah versus the G4AR, supposedly on the same band and with the same connections, same wiring. I didn't change anything. I just put one on the other. My signal to noise was also better on the Chester Cheetah. So I don't know if that modem is just picking up that signal better or what, but it was showing a better performance there, and then obviously a lot faster speed. But again, this is the exact same setup, no changes to adapters or anything, or pass-through stuff. Is all the same pieces of hardware. So what we can see here is I did go to a 5G SA to see how it went, because honestly, my G4AR always did pretty well on 5G SA. And sure enough, when I forced the Cheetah onto NSA, then I actually got one of my better speeds out there. So 650 down and 46 up, and really good ping. So quite frankly, at least if last night was a representation of how it always performs, for me, I might actually keep it on 5G NSA because of the ping performance and very good upload and download performance, even though it wasn't the absolute highest. So take it for what you want. If you have lots of questions, I'm sure you do, put them in the comments down below. I'll try to answer them. If you want to ask for some other testing or other insight, please do put those down in the comments below. That's the best way to get a hold of me and to reach me. And then for me to answer, I try to respond to them the best I can. So I appreciate everyone sticking around for all these details, and I hope it helps you out make a decision on what to do to get your fastest 5G internet.